Hi, this is Adam Carroll from Justice for All, and this show is UN This Week. And we're going to be discussing a new treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. This year, much of our attention has been on the threat of the global pandemic, as well as the rise of a politics of division and disinformation. However, 9 countries still possess more than 14,000 nuclear weapons. Despite the over 250,000 deaths to date in the pandemic, a nuclear war would make the current crisis seem puny and insubstantial. On July 7th, 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was formally adopted with the support of 122 countries. This treaty bans nuclear weapons and establishes a clear path towards abolition. However, for the treaty to formally enter into legal force, it required ratification by the governments of 50 nations. It was only this past October 24th that the 50th nation, I think it was Honduras, ratified it. That means that on January 22nd, 2021, the treaty will become international law. Is this the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons? In December 2017, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its role in promoting the treaty. To discuss its efforts, we had Seth Sheldon, a guest from ICANN, on our show on September 10th, a month after the annual remembrance of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atrocities. However, on today's show, we have Rebecca Irby. Rebecca Irby is the founding partner and president of Peace Institute, which has special consulting status with the Economic and Social Forum at the United Nations. Rebecca has spoken about nuclear abolition and heart-centered leadership at Harvard Law School, the Yale Policy Conference, the Pyeongchang Global Peace Forum, the Free Minds, Free People, Busan Democracy, and also will be at the Barger Leadership Institute at the University of Michigan next year. So welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just to start with yesterday's press release, I was wondering we could take a look at it. The press release describes this ratification, and it is co-signed with some illustrious partners. I was wondering if you could say something about it.
Of course. Yeah, it was really exciting. I work very closely with IPPNW, which is the International Positions to Prevent Nuclear War, and also with Congo, the coalition of NGOs at the UN. So that was the joint statement that we provided. We thought that it was really important as some of the major NGOs working on this, that we put forth a joint statement showing how excited the UN is, how excited the other NGOs within the UN system are about this treaty and how important it is for the work moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Was it challenging to get this kind of thing co-signed and out there into the public?
It wasn't difficult to get it co-signed, but it is always interesting working with so many different NGOs from all over the world, and the language and what we want to say, and being from non-nuclear weapon states, nuclear weapon states, people want to highlight and talk about different things. So I would say we were very careful about the wording of this statement, making sure that we were really taking into account what we wanted to say, and ensuring that it really encompassed the entire community. So I wouldn't say that it was difficult, but I would say that it does take a little bit longer when working with so many organizations to get the statement out.
Well, it's great that you have so much support, and of course, it's about time that this treaty passed. But what does it really mean? Is this treaty really going to have an impact?
Well, and that's the part that I think is really exciting, and I'm so happy that you're bringing this to the public's attention today because it's certainly not going to be spoken about in the media here in the U.S. or with other nuclear armed states because they don't want to talk about it. It's not a positive move for them in particular, and the reason that this has, I think, more teeth than what it's been given credit for is once something becomes illegal, and there are other examples of this type of treaty and how well it has worked over time. Other examples of similar treaties that have been written in a similar way that use the same framework are the Biological Weapon Treaty, the Chemical Weapon Treaty, the Cluster Munition Treaty, and the Landmine Treaty. So there's a lot of history and there's a lot of precedent. And actually, what pushed this treaty over was the humanitarian aspect. I know that Seth talked about this. I work very closely with Seth. It's always wonderful hearing him speak. So I'm very, I believe your audience was primed with the treaty, how it worked, the humanitarian aspects, and why that was such an important piece of this treaty and how it really pushed it to get signed so quickly and enter into force so quickly. So being able to focus on that humanitarian aspect, um, this treaty making the weapon itself illegal has a huge impact. And we've already seen it, and especially here in New York City, in the beginning of this year, in January, at the City Council, we were able to pass a divestment bill. New York City divested all of their mutual funds, which is $500 million, from nuclear weapons. There are banks, there are institutions, there are entire states that are divesting from nuclear weapons because, and this was before the treaty even passed, this is because once the treaty becomes international law, those weapons themselves are declared illegal. And any organization, any company, anyone who has a conscience, who has ethics, most companies have a social good contract where you're not allowed to be invested in something which is illegal. And now that it is international law and it will be a recognized illegal weapon, we're seeing even the Bank of Japan, one of the largest banks, Mitsubishi Bank of Japan, divested last year from nuclear weapons. Like it's definitely not something that's being talked about from the nuclear armed states, but it is happening rapidly around the world, and it's very exciting to see.
I guess I have mixed feelings because I'm a little shocked to think of New York City investing in nuclear weapons in the first place. So as a New Yorker, I'm a little taken aback, but maybe that's naive. I'm really glad to hear about divestment. I'm also interested that I've hardly heard anything about this in the media. So as you suggest, yeah, there may be reasons for that.
There are specific and very calculated reasons for that. And we've seen as the treaty has gained more notoriety around the world and more countries have been signing on and have been interested in working with the organizations, with ICANN and with all of our partners. The nuclear armed states have been pressuring these countries and pressuring institutions to not talk about it, make sure that there's a blackout in the media about it, and going so far as to threaten to take away aid from certain countries if they signed. And this was not this was most of the nuclear armed states together going out and trying to intimidate smaller countries. One of the ways that we combated that was bringing together all of these smaller countries and helping them form coalitions so that they would be able to write into their constitutions the way that they're going to ratify this. And if the threats from the nuclear armed states of losing aid were actually acted upon, the rest of the coalition was willing to take up and help support, which is, seeing so much multilateral cooperation in order to get this treaty passed has also been, I think it really speaks volumes about how important this issue is to people around the world and what countries and citizens are willing to do to get this passed.
Yeah,
and
that's almost
in a very, very short period of time, I must say.
yeah, a few years. That's sort of an I am Spartacus moment that you've just described. You know, that level of solidarity of
Yeah.
willing to push back collectively against the bullying of the nuclear armed. Is it all the nuclear armed countries, or is it just a few of them that are behaving in this way?
I would say that it's being led by the US and France, or
Mm,
the main two, and then the NATO countries underneath them, either agreeing with or just kind of acquiescing and not saying much.
mm,
So during the negotiation process, all of the nuclear armed states and all of the NATO states boycotted the negotiations, although they
mm,
were invited at every point and urged to join. And you know, one of their stances was if they weren't involved in the process, that it wouldn't affect them in the long
mm,
run. So that they're like, well, we're not going to sign, so we're not going to be a state party, so it has no impact on us. So we want nothing to do with it. And the rest of the world said, okay, that's fine. But what are you going
mm,
to do when no one's allowed to invest in your weapon anymore? Like
mm,
how are you going to move forward when there's no money and there's no one buying and there's no one allowing you to store, there's no one allowing you to mine anymore?
mm,
What are you going to do then?
mm. Yeah, no, that's quite interesting. Thinking back, it's about some of the other previous agreements,
Mhm.
and I guess there was a or there is a
Yeah.
non-proliferation agreement. I was wondering if you could say something about that. Who signed it? What countries signed it? And how long did it take to pass that?
I don't know how long it took to pass, but I know that it took a significant amount of years longer than this treaty.
Mm, mhm,
Most of the UN, most of the state parties are signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT for short. Um, all of the nuclear armed states are state parties. And they are the
mm,
original five.
mm,
They are also the five Security Council members that have veto power. So one thing that the new treaty, the TPNW, what we like to think about and say and encourage people to really dig in and do some research, because there was a lot of comments that this new treaty was either superseding or nullifying the TPNW, and that's not the
mm,
case at all in any way.
mm,
If anything, the TPNW is making the NPT stronger and holding the nuclear armed states accountable for what they claimed that they were going to do within the last 50 years. Um,
mhm.
so
So it's a pathway, sort of, right? A pathway towards abolition.
it's a pathway. So the NPT was supposed to be about no one else getting more nuclear weapons, no more being
Mm,
created, us stopping and
mm,
limiting our, or not limiting, but getting rid of the stores that we currently had. And that was the whole purpose of the NPT, which the entire world agreed on. And they gave themselves 25 years, which they thought would be more than enough time. After
mm,
that came and went, and not only were there not less nuclear weapons, there were more, and there were more countries with them. They gave themselves an indefinite amount of time. And we are now at this year, 2020 was the 50th anniversary. And still, we have the nuclear armed states. We have more countries that have nuclear weapons. So to me, this argument of deterrence has failed, and we've seen it clearly fail. Because if it truly worked, there would not be almost double the amount of countries that have nuclear weapons from
mm,
when this treaty was created. So that's why I believe the TPNW is really necessary. It gives the NPT the teeth it never had. So the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty does not make the weapon illegal. And without the
mm,
weapon itself being illegal, there's very little that can be done when there
mm,
are violations.
mm.
Um, it's
No,
kind
it's
of,
interesting.
yeah,
So, for example, like I guess Israel pretends it doesn't have nuclear weapons, but I guess it has hundreds.
yes.
So, this and just maybe I could also call out Pakistan or India, or I guess some of these countries have not signed on to the earlier agreement. So, does that affect how one tries to implement this latest treaty. I'm assuming they didn't sign this treaty, but they're
No.
still going to be impacted economically and logistically.
Right. And I think that that's what makes this treaty very different from the NPT is that if a state party didn't sign the NPT, there's nothing that can be done. There's no pressure point to put on them besides
Mm,
the international community shaming them, which in some cases work and in some cases it doesn't. And
mm,
then other treaties imposing sanctions and other things. It's a game we've been playing for such a long time and we
mm,
see that it hasn't been working.
mm,
So making something illegal in the same way that chemical weapons, so actually I'm going to go to landmines, the landmine
mm,
treaty. The US
mm,
is not a states party to the landmine treaty. We
mm,
still abide by it. We still help other countries around the world get rid of their landmines. And one
mm,
of the biggest reasons that that is because it became illegal, people couldn't invest in it, it wasn't a viable weapon anymore. So even though the US is not a party to it, it still is abiding by it. We don't use them any longer because
mm,
they're just not viable. When there's no money, it's not viable. And that's the way to make actual changes in what we want to see. You have to follow the money. And you have to help people understand where that money is going and where we can start divesting.
mm,
Caveat to this, the other really, really important piece of this is ensuring that when that money is divested, that it doesn't just go back into the military budget, that there are contingencies in place as to where that money actually goes. And that's a lot of the legislation that's going around the country and around the world. That's being written into the laws. So that's something that has been a really big part of this divestment campaign as well.
mm. It's interesting. What about bilateral agreements? I guess under the Trump administration, the treaties between U.S. and Russia, for example, have lost ground. That's a vague statement. I'm not quite sure where all these treaties are at, and hopefully there will be a different attitude in the coming year with the Biden administration. But both the US and Russia have about 4,000 nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
Give or take, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what about bilateral agreements? Are they equally important? Are they complementary to these multilateral treaties? How do you see them?
I think they're very important. Specifically, the New Start Treaty is set to expire on February 5th, and
Huh.
the Biden administration has already signaled that he is willing to re-sign it, as is Vladimir Putin. So that's a really
Huh.
positive. That's really, really positive, and that's really good for everyone in the world. The
Mm,
reason that bilateral agreements are so important is between the nuclear armed states for them to agree to not start or continue an arms trade is really important, and that's that is a positive for the entire world,
mm,
because they are not going to sign this new treaty. So having something in place while the new treaty works its way around the world, while these divestment campaigns get teeth and start really having an impact, it takes a while. Um, I think the reason things like legislating, uh, like a how shall I say this? Activism and legislation aren't something that usually go together, but I feel
mm,
like it's really the only way for the things that we talk about in the street for them to have actual impact. There has to be legislative changes. But there's so much bureaucracy and legislation takes a long time. So there
mm,
has to be a temperance of our expectations. And I think it's really important to understand the process and how long it takes. So having these bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, having multiple ways of attacking this problem is a really, really important aspect of
mm,
this. And that's what I think ICANN was able to do by bringing together so many different organizations that have backgrounds in many different areas. We were able to come together and really attack this on all fronts. And that's why
mm.
I believe we've been so successful.
Mm. There's also the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Did I get the name right? With the JCPOA.
Yes, the
With
JCPOA.
Yeah, with Iran and of course the way Trump administration has just unilaterally withdrawn from it, and how that's eroded the existing agreement even with EU and other partners.
Yeah.
Um, is there any news about that? There's been rumors the last couple of days that the U.S. is going to now suddenly bomb Iran, which I've been hearing. It's anxiety, but perhaps there's some signals people are picking up on. So, are there any thoughts about the revival of that agreement?
It's a very good question, and it's a very difficult answer. And the reason it's difficult to say is because of all of the uncertainty in the
Mm,
region and with the current administration and what they are planning to do. Um, they have made it quite clear that they want some big action against Iran before they leave office. What
mm,
that's going to be and how that's going to impact what the Biden administration is able to do, we don't know. We don't know how Iran will react, but uh, as of right now, it does not look very positive.
mm. Yeah, and of course, in a very politicized way, that is exactly about nonproliferation,
Yeah,
except that it's so politicized, and it's
exactly.
hard to quite trust any of the partners, frankly. But the U.S. Doesn't appear to be um, a neutral party in any way. So these multilateral treaties then it will go into effect in January. Not quite sure why we have to wait, but I guess that's how it works. Um, so building a movement for uh, to work towards the end of nuclear weapons, and so how do you build a movement? I understand that Peace Institute has a lot of community education, youth programs, all kinds of things. I was wondering if you could describe some of the things you all do.
Sure. Um, building a movement takes connecting with your community, and the way that this all started, well before ICANN won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I would say having that certainly has helped with getting the message out. But well before that, and I think the reason that we were so successful, it was mainly a number of young women that, well, we were young then when we came together
Mm,
about 10 years ago. And it, for me, I visited Japan. I worked in education and I write curriculum and, well, I should say I wrote curriculum and textbooks on social emotional learning, on empathy, and on compassion, and how to teach social skills connected to core curriculums. And I've done that in the U.S. and in other countries around the world. Um, so I was in Japan working on a curriculum for their government, and I visited Hiroshima as an educator. I was very interested. World War II also has a big impact in my own personal story. So going there and seeing and learning that everything I was taught was not what truly happened. I just felt very passionate about telling people what truly happened and the true impact of this and what that means and what that looks like. So, fast forward many, many, many years later, just finding other people who believed the same thing and all of us coming together and being like, if we just found enough people around the world that agreed with us, like if we just could ask them, I think that we would find most of the world doesn't want nuclear weapons. And what would happen if we did that? And I think most of the people in our lives telling us that we were crazy, that we were ruining, like wasting our careers working on an issue and a problem that's never going to, that it would never amount to anything, I think gave us even more encouragement. And that's kind of we're rebels at heart. So it
mm,
really, it pushed us to be like, oh, okay, we'll see. we'll see what happens. And that's kind of been the attitude of us going into this. Just like, I'm positive that if we just asked enough people, we could get rid of these. And that's where it started. And that attitude and idea, passion, being passionate about something and believing in it. That's how you
No,
build a
it's
movement.
great. I mean, our NGO works a lot on addressing ongoing genocide, and it's like nuclear weapons. This is a huge issue, and it can be very daunting. And it's great to hear from your experience that there are moments to celebrate. Yes, there are still nuclear weapons in the world, but there's also hope. So
Right.
that's it's good to be reminded. Well, a couple of things I wanted to ask, including about your story. But your organization has a link to um, uh, other organizations. They're listed there: Peace Culture Village,
Mm-hmm.
Rotarians as well, which it's nice to see they're on board, some of
Yeah.
them. That's really cool. So movement building and alliance building. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about, like, since you founded this, what changes have you seen?
What changes have I seen in
Well, in the sort of landscape of activism.
ah, well, it was very, it, I fell into this. I always say, like, or it came and found me. I did not pick this,
Mm,
um, this life or this career. So, uh, it's, I was working in education and like I was writing textbooks. So yes, things have changed dramatically for me, in what I do and being able to speak to people and having a much larger stage to speak on than training teachers. But I think that
mm,
my experience doing that and my outlook, and the way that we organize, it still comes from a very similar place of, we need to educate and we need to give people things that they're able to do in very small chunks. So I approach my activism very much in the same way that I approach my trainings, which is like, we're both here to learn from each other. I have some ideas that can help you further what you're already doing. You're already concerned about things. Like, we all will suffer and will all, like, nuclear weapons impact all of us in so many ways. And here are ways that they impact you and your community that you're already fighting for this. If you join this, like, we will have more clout, we'll have more ability to get the things done that need to be done. And what I have found that works for me and my organization is looking at the nexus between racism, climate, and nuclear weapons.
mm,
And the reason that that's so incredibly important is the communities that are most affected by all of the aspects of nuclear weapons, the mining, where they're tested, the housing of them, it's always in communities of color and minority communities. So
mm,
looking at
mm,
the impact that these weapons have on those communities, also looking at where nuclear weapons are stored. They're stored in coastal areas. So also the impact of climate is huge. And we can't ignore all of these, and they all work so intimately together. So when looking at those intersections, that's where we have found the most success.
mm,
Building coalitions of other huge movements around breaking down systemic racism and fighting climate change. Being
mm,
able to bring those activists together and having conversations, and us looking at and being like, we can't get rid of nuclear weapons and work on climate change without money. We can't work on breaking down systemic racism without money. Who's holding all the money? Trillions of dollars held up in nuclear weapons specifically, not just the military budget, but nuclear weapons specifically.
mm.
So it's
Wow.
changing the mindset and understanding, like, we have to divest this, we have to make committees that has to go to fighting systemic racism and climate, and like, these are the ways to do it. So it's like very empowering and very exciting because we give people things that they can actually do, very, very
Mm.
easy, simple things that they can do that have a huge impact.
Well, after our brief break, we're going to talk a bit about what people can do to help. But we will be right back. This is Adam Carroll with UN This Week, and we'll see you in a moment.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's world because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's world because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
And this is Adam Carroll back speaking about the new treaty towards abolishing nuclear weapons. And our guest is Rebecca Irby from Peace Institute. Before I forget to ask this very important question, why is peace spelled without an E?
Yes. Well, we're peace, education, art, and communication, and that's what the letters stand for. So, and pronounced peak. And and I think it's one of the reasons, including art and education are very important to me and to our organization is when we talk about building movements and we talk about connecting with other people, the way that we have found is the most impactful is through art. Art being our only universal language throughout the world. We can share stories. So we've, one of the major things that we do are bringing impacted communities to policy meetings and not just having them give testimony. Unfortunately, and within the UN system, that's an everyday. People making policies, writing treaties, they're just hearing atrocities 24/7. So unfortunately, it does not have the impact maybe that it had in the past. So finding new ways of connecting to people's hearts. It's very easy to write people off, to make calculations about certain numbers when you're not confronted with what those numbers represent. And those numbers represent people, communities. And when you have to be confronted with those people in that actual community that you're about to write off, it's really different what you're able to say and do. And so finding ways to connect with those in power, connecting to their heart is really important. And that's what the heart-centered leadership that I talk about is about, being able to lead with our heart and with our minds. That's, in my opinion and estimation, the only way that we're going to be able to fix our planet. Like, we have to learn how to coexist with one another and with our planet. And that only happens with love and with empathy. So that's hugely important. And I've seen with my own eyes the impact that, a politician being connected to their heart, their policies change. The way that they write things, the way that they interact, the way that they speak to people, it changes.
It's good to see that there are others at many different levels of the UN system that think in this way, that even at the Security Council, there are members who are concerned about the actual personal relationship and the trust building among the members, and make sure that there are annual retreats, that there are ways to humanize the experience, even if you've got real differences and a lot of cynicism about the use of power at that level. As far as the UN Security Council goes, have they been involved on this issue? Do they weigh in collectively, or do they have discussions of any kind on non-proliferation?
Only when it comes to violations, I
Right.
would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way that the Security Council is set up and organized, they very, 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 very rarely make proactive statements.
Would you say that in Geneva or in New York there are committees or working groups that are particularly helpful in moving this issue forward?
Well, UN ODA, so the Office of Disarmament Affairs here in New York, has been monumental. We would not have been able to do the work that we've done without their support and help. And I'm sure, so again, this whole activism space is very new for me. I've only been in it for the last 4 years. So I don't have an intimate knowledge of the workings of New York versus Geneva. I've had the honor of being invited to go to Geneva to some conventions and conferences, but the only difference that I could really see was the food between the two buildings.
Yeah. Well,
but I'm
I
sure
won't
that
ask.
there are.
Yeah. Well, when you were in Japan, I mean, you mentioned kind of connecting to this issue when you were in Japan, and the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Is the name Hibakashi, something like that?
Hibakusha.
Hibakusha. And so they remain a moral authority, and I guess they speak in this way from a place of authenticity that maybe can resonate even in the halls of the UN. But you spoke also about your own personal experience, and I was wondering what that journey was that you referred to.
Sure. Well, World War II impacted so many different cultures and people. I am of mixed racial background, and my grandmother is Indonesian. My grandfather on my mother's side was Dutch. My father's side, Jamaican and Mohawk. And on my mother's side, my Indonesian grandmother, her family, her entire family was killed, and she was put into a work camp, a Japanese work camp in Indonesia. And she was there she got put into the camp with my uncle, who was a toddler at the time. And so our family, like our family history, are talking about just talking about our history and what happened. World War II was not something my grandmother ever wanted to talk about until she was much, much older. The only thing that I knew was that she didn't like Japan or like Japanese things, but nobody would talk about it. It was just like, don't bring up, because I loved sushi when I was little, and I loved things about Japan, and my family was just like, don't say anything like that around grandmother. And okay, fine, whatever. I did not realize until I was going to Japan as an adult to work, and it was a big thing in my family for me to go tell my grandmother what I was doing and where I was going, kind of to get her blessing and to let her know. She was much older and she was sick. So it was a whole big thing, but she gave me her blessing. But understanding and looking into and learning more about her story, she would always say, just kind of like offhand growing up, and I would remember that the bombing of Japan is what saved her, and she believed in her bones the only reason I existed was because of those bombs. And she would talk about it a lot, and that was the only thing that she would ever say about it. And because she escaped from the concentration camp during that period. It was very chaotic. So kind of having that background, having that kind of knowledge, but still very interested in war, learning about war and peace, and wanting to know more about the story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and going there and visiting and seeing how many civilians were impacted and what the actual gravity of this bomb is, how generation after generation it's still impacting people. I'd actually met an in utero survivor, and I ended up making a film and an entire curriculum and textbook around this family and their story. And that's what I use for an empathy building curriculum here in the US, based off of the stories of these survivors.
Wow, and we need so much empathy building here in this country too. My goodness. Well, you're addressing, I mean, it feels like you're engaged with healing and with kind of karmic issues, you know, and it's really pretty deep. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
What can people do with viewers of this program? What do you suggest they do in order to make this better, to build on this, to find opportunity?
Absolutely. So as I was saying, there's so many different ways to get involved. One of the biggest was like education and awareness building. If you're interested in this and if you start to understand how it impacts your everyday life. So having more and more people talk about this, how it relates to them, because it can feel very amorphous. You know, you talk about nuclear weapons and you're like, oh my God, that's crazy, nuclear weapons. No, like who talks about that? Nobody talks about nuclear weapons over lunch. Like that's just not something that happens. And within the campaign, we feel like that is also purposeful. If it's this big, crazy thing that's like off in a way that we never talk about, we never think about, it's very easy to keep it shrouded in mystery and keep it something like, we have to control this, you know nothing about this. So like that's just be interested in it, learn more about it. And then if you want to get involved and be involved in legislation, on the ICANN website, which we can throw up in the chat, I'll send you the link right now. But you know, there are so many different ways. There's the divestment campaigns. I think truly, honestly, this is the biggest way to get involved. And it's very simple. It's very easy. There's an entire toolkit depending on how involved you want to be. You want to just send a letter to your senator. You want to send a letter to a certain organization. You may be very surprised as to what your investments are. Looking in your own personal portfolio. So when I started this work, I had no idea that even I was invested in nuclear weapons. I had to take my bank account. I had to change that. Like there's small things, but all of it makes a statement. The more people, the more organizations. And as I said, like billions of dollars are being pulled right now on a daily basis, rolling. So the more that happens, it's going to build up steam and have a bigger and bigger and bigger impact. So the divestment campaign, super simple. You can do it personally. You can encourage your workplace to do it. Your university. So I would really, really recommend checking out ICANN's toolkits, because there are letters there for you. All you have to do is sign your name and send it. So many different ways. And I know legislating feels like it takes a long time, and it might not be like that immediate thing of like going out into the street and protesting, but that's where real change happens. And you know, if we can help people understand, like that's where our teeth are. Money. We have to look at, you have to follow the money and make sure that money is being taken out and put into places that it's needed.
Well, even with the hope of a new administration starting in January, nothing is going to change unless we all push. And so I think this was good, really great advice and inspiring. It's great that you started this. And I hope that it continues and it gets all the support it needs. So I think that's all the time we have for today, but the struggle continues. So thank you very much, Rebecca. And
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks. And it does, the Buddha behind you, does it say dream on the bottom there? I think.
Yes, it does. Wait,
dream.
let's see. Yep, there
So
we go.
remember to dream. Good dreams.
Always,
Yeah.
always, always, always.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next Thursday. Same time, same place.